that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. As we know, Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Met Council has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person committee meeting for reasons stated in the Governor's emergency executive order. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this transportation committee will be conducted under Minnesota statute section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. When we do so, Becky will call the roll in alphabetical order. I, the other council members, and the public who may be monitoring the meeting must be able to hear your vote. When your name is called for each vote, please clearly state yea or nay or abstain so I can determine whether a majority voted in favor of the motion. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Becky, can you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson. Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin.
Present.
Barber.
Here. And with that, we have a quorum, and I call to order the meeting of Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for October 12th, 2020. Our first item of business is approval of the agenda. We do not need to take a roll call for approval of the agenda. If anyone has any changes or additions to the agenda, you could let me know now. All right, seeing none, we will say the agenda is approved, and we move on to approval of the minutes, and the minutes are for the September 28th, 2020 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Cummings moves.
It's moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Zirin seconds.
Second by Zarin. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson. Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion passes and the minutes are approved. Our next business is the tech report. And I see that David Fenley isn't here, but I do see that Daryl Paulson is here. So I'm assuming Daryl will be giving the report today. Welcome to the committee, Daryl.
Oh, my mic is on. Sorry about that.
There you go. Now I can hear you.
I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. The tech committee met on, let's see here, this is not too long ago, October 7th on Wednesday, just last week, and we discussed the only thing on our agenda on last Wednesday was the goal line update report. So I'm here to update report to you. We as of, I believe it was a couple weeks ago, we have met our 60% design review, and it is currently, we're still open for public comment, and I believe that public comment ends in, I'm trying to do this all in one space here. The public comment ends, I believe, in November 16th, in 2020. One of the things that I would love to say, and I do love our team as well, and I love the council as well, is I would love to give you just a little bit of an update of what we discussed. We discussed platform height, and we discussed whether or not we could use a 10-inch versus 11-inch or a 12-inch. And it looks like, because the 10-inch does, after some rigorous testing, the 10-inch platform design does meet our specs, and it does comply with the federal regulations, and it does meet the pursuant standard to operating procedures in the federal regulations, 36 CFR, and it's pursuant to the ADA as well. And it allows us the continued development and technical details to assist bus and docking minimums and improving customer experience. So really what that says to us and says to your committee is that we have to make sure we do our due diligence and provide rigorous training for those drivers, those operators, so that they can dock and get as close to that platform as they can, so we can eliminate the 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 3-inch gap as much as possible, so we can do a total roll on without having to deploy the ramp. But we do have the ability to deploy the ramp if they ask for it. So with that, I also say that we talked about some of the consistency of the station designs and the fact to have all your items that are listed within that that platform, have them consistent in every station design and every station platform. One of the things that was brought to my attention as I chaired the tech meeting last week was the real-time annunciator, the tone annunciator, or the tone indicator. How does somebody who is sight impaired or visually impaired find that tone indicator if they don't know where it is particularly? Is it going to be periodically? Is it going to tell my blind or sight impaired colleagues that yes, you can press this button to get detailed information? I mean, we don't know those things, but so I do know that was something that we feel is doable and it's done. But one of the other things that was mentioned to us was, I believe it was the Hazel station, or the Hazel, if I'm pronouncing that right, where it's like you have to cross a very busy intersection and you have to sit in the medium in order to cross the second part of it. My sight impaired folks said that it is very difficult to even cross that intersection, even if the cars or everything chooses to work out in their favor. So they asked us to revisit that. So we did ask the team to go back and look at that, and they'll bring us another update probably in the next couple months. With that, that is all I have. I can stand for questions. I mean, I have more details if you want, but I think that's enough.
Thank you very much. Do council members have any questions for Mr. Paulson? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you for that presentation. It's really important for us to get that type of feedback for accessibility. And I'm sure that you're going to bring that to our transportation team and engineers to see and check on the feasibility and the way that we can be supportive. So I just wanted to say that and encourage you to follow up with our transportation managers.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? All right, seeing that, thank you, Daryl, and thanks really to the committee. The work that you guys do is very helpful, and I think that it really helps provide good insight and really gives us an opportunity to improve our projects as we're doing them. So thank you so much, and I'm really glad to see you here today.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, then next we're on to MTS Director Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
A couple updates. As has been the cycle for the past few weeks, the Governor's Blue Ribbon Committee met today They're on the same cycle as the Transportation Committee. Today's topics were around transit governance, and the committee heard two presentations. The first was from House research staff, who gave a broad overview of transit in Minnesota and in detail for our region. They covered statutory authority, funding, system operators, some of the efficiency measures, and then finance. And it kind of concluded with a statement that you all know that transit finance is complex and that there are many entities involved. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone on this committee. The second presentation was covered the findings of the 2011 Legislative Auditor's Report on Transit Governance. And the state auditor who conducted that report back in 2011 produced the findings, did reflect on that the auditor, she had not updated any of the information for what has happened since 2011, but felt several of the findings were still relevant. Again, it was a good overview of how complex transit is and all the different entities involved. Two of the key recommendations, one of the key recommendations from the audit was that the metropolitan government be reformed. And so the committee discussed what the options were that were discussed in that audit, and had a good discussion about many of the issues that came up with the audit about elected versus non-elected, whether elected officials would have any conflicts in other roles, and then also some commitments of time and other issues. And if the audit report definitely said they only looked at transit governance and not the other functions of the council. And so the recommendations were fairly narrow, but the committee said, ended just a few minutes before this meeting started. Lots of questions. They again are not at any recommendations. And at the next meeting, they will be hearing presentations from a variety of entities that have expressed opinions about metropolitan governance in the past, from Citizens League to Metro Cities to some of the county governments. And so they'll be hearing those presentations next cycle, and I'll give a report on that in 2 weeks. Just a heads up, we'll be sending out to all council members the transportation policy plan this week. That includes our revisions based on the public comment period. We thought it's a very long document, important document for this council, and so we wanted to give you extra time to just review the changes that we are recommending and making before we bring it to this committee and the council for approval next month. And TAB also received this document and asked for an extra week to review, so we figured that you would want some time too. So watch for that in your inbox with links to the various chapters and overview of all the changes we've made to the text based on public comments and various editing. Lastly, a COVID update across our contractors. We had one positive test among employees in the past week. That brings us to 56 positive tests for those that we've been notified of. And the good news is so far 53 of those 56 have returned to work. The other 3 have been more recent positives, and so they're not able to return to work. And then the update on ridership. Metro Mobility and Transit Link ridership has now crossed that 50% of normal level threshold. It's been basically on a steady, slow growth since June 1st. And this is a much different pattern than what we're of course seeing on fixed route, which is not growing, not at that 50% level. And there's been more or least flatter growth on the contracted side and express route other services. So it's something we watch closely, because if our growth gets a lot higher, which is fine, we will have to reevaluate our other special services like food delivery and essential worker trips. But it's an important level to getting us back to 50% of where we were at prior to COVID in the region. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Are there questions from council members? All right, thanks, Nick. Seeing none, we'll move on to General Manager Koistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with a COVID update. We continue to monitor the number of employees at Metro Transit who have been confirmed to have had COVID. We are up to 107 cases from the start of the pandemic. through October 11th. Since the 9/28 meeting, 8 new confirmed cases in the last 2 weeks, 3 operators, 5 non-operators, 3 from Rooter Garage, 2 from Blue Line, 1 from Finance, 1 from Haywood Garage, and 1 from Nicollet Garage. The fact that they're spread out is of course important in knowing that there's not a community spread occurring in one of our locations, and that's been the pattern throughout these months of experiencing the COVID issues. To date, monthly totals have been, give you a sense of where they've been and where we're heading. Is April there was 6, May with 27, June 11, July 11, August 26, September 18, and October thus far 7, and that roughly fits the pattern of what we're seeing in case growth and case declines across the state. I also wanted to mention discussions that are occurring with North Star funding partners. I believe that the council members received an email from Chair Zelli on this, but wanted you to be aware that we're meeting with North Star funding partners regarding the future of North Star services during the COVID period. We also reached out to FTA to understand our options. As you know, we have about a 97% declines in ridership in North Star. That amounts to somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 riders per day, going both ways. And we've reduced service from 72 trips per week to 20 trips per week. With fixed costs, this means we're experiencing considerable expense per ride. In general, this is the time of year where we meet with all our funding partners to talk about budgets, because as funding partners, they of course have a vested interest in our budget going forward in 2021. And these meetings are taking on, of course, as you would imagine with COVID, a little bit different tone than they've taken on in the past, where we have to look more closely at our service provision and the degree of services that we provide and so forth. This is particularly highlighted with North Star because as a commuter route, with having the ridership reduced by 96-97%, it's something we have to have a conversation about. So again, we're having that conversation. It'll come back to the council through its budgeting process as we conclude it. We're talking with the FTA to see what options we have in the short term, and we'll be reporting back on that as we learn more and as these conversations proceed. Finally, I wanted to mention that Metro Transit received 3 awards as part of the Minnesota Public Transportation Association annual conference. Deputy Chief Operations for Bus, Brian Funk, won Transit Professional of the Year for his leadership as the operations chief during the pandemic. I can tell you that was well earned, night and day work, and really appreciate the efforts of Brian and all the Metro Transit staff as we've had to make so many adjustments and realignments in response to the pandemic. The Transit Assistance Program, TAP program, won the Management Innovation Award. Andrea Keepy accepted the award on behalf of TAP, but I also want to acknowledge Mary Capistrant and Nick Ewell for all the work they've done to build the program. That's in recognition of the recent expansion to people who are unemployed and to individuals and to the other individuals that we did the expansion with. And then Melanie Benson received Operator of the Year award. Melanie's been an operator with us for 44 years. I believe she drives the 23 and has developed over a long period of time a unique relationship with her riders, and well deserved. And so it's just great to see the recognition that people are getting and have earned and deserved, and it comes well timed with all the other more difficult issues we have to deal with. So I'll end that and take questions.
Thank you, General Manager. Are there questions from council members? I don't see any, but on behalf of the committee, please reach out and congratulate Brian, the TAP program team, and Melanie. That's all fantastic. And it's really, we know they do a great job, and it's really, really exciting when you see somebody who's worked with us for 44 years. And to find people that stick with an organization tells me that, you know, even through some tough times, we do some things right. So send our congratulations on to all of them and to you.
And she still loves her work, Madam Chair. That's what she assured me. She loves it. So that's great. After 44 years, that's something.
That is good, and we all need some good news these days. So I'm going to take that and enjoy this moment. So congratulations to them all. So then now we can move on to our business items. There are no items on consent. Our first business item is business item 2020-254. It's Southwest LRT SEH contract amendment, and we have Jim Alexander here.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, well, I'd like to introduce 2020-254. I'm Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Southwest LRT. This item has to do with a contract amendment to SEH, that's short, Elliott Hendrickson. They're a consultant that's helping us out with construction monitoring as it pertains to contaminated materials. We have a current contract that was awarded back in 2018. Slightly over 2.1 million, and we need to amend that contract to bring it up to nearly 3 million. And the reason why we need to do that is when this contract was first initially let, we didn't really have a good feel about how the construction was going to be done. We didn't have the contractor on board at that time, and we have since really monitored how the construction is going, and there's more work locations than were originally anticipated, and plus the additional longer work hours that are going on right now. We need to lift this contract up a bit. So the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve a sole source contract amendment for short Elliott Hendrickson for construction monitoring for contaminated materials to add $853,380 for a total contract amount of $2,998,986. And just want to note that in terms of the DBE, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise contribution that the contractor has, or the consultant has been doing so far, they had a goal of 15%, and they're doing very well at just under 23% as of July of 2020. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a comment than a question, but I think in a project that is this complex, I mean, and it's the largest in the state has ever undertaken, but to lay down a 15-mile in a city that is going full bore and is an unbelievable project to undertake. And I know how dedicated you and your staff are to making sure that it is done correctly. You can't anticipate everything until you get into it. Is anybody who's done anything even small, like a home repair, or you bump the wall and you find some surprises? So I just would thank you and your team for the work that you're doing to pay attention and keep the project moving forward. It's very exciting, and within the entire region, the entire state is going to benefit mightily when this is completed. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, additional questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-254.
Cummings moves approval.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Chambliss seconds.
Second by Chambliss. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Becky, could you call the roll?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Hudson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner, Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Jim. And we get to have you for the second one. It's business item 2020-255, which is Southwest LRT subordinate funding agreement with MnDOT.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'd just like to start off with, I see there's a couple of items with MnDOT this afternoon. Just want to point out that MnDOT is a very important partner on these projects. We've been partnering with MnDOT on all the rail projects in the region here, and they're a key component to our success. And we want to keep that going on. And so what this item has to do with an SFA, subordinate funding agreement, for the 2021 construction year, and that really provides staff support to the project. And they primarily help us out in the right-of-way field, but also in construction, and there's also design support as well. And so this action would call for the Metropolitan Council to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a subordinate funding agreement, number 13, to the master funding agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for 2021 SWLRT staff support in a total amount not to exceed $2.2 million. With that, I'll be available for any questions.
All right, thank you, Jim. Are there questions from council members? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve business item. Hold on, it's wrong on the agenda or the business item, 2020-255.
Cummings moves approval.
It's moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Seconded by Zirin.
Second by Zarin. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner, Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we're on to business item 2020-256. It's Metro Blue Line Extension, subordinate funding agreements with MnDOT, and we have Nick Landwehr here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Nick Landwehr. I am the Director of Engineering Design for the Blue Line Project, Blue Line Extension Project Office. And I want to reiterate what Mr. Alexander said, that MnDOT has been an important partner with us in all these large capital transit projects. So this business item 2020-256 is a supplemental funding agreement with MnDOT, and the proposed action is for the Metropolitan Council to authorize a regional administrator to negotiate and execute a subordinate funding agreement with MnDOT to pay MnDOT $1.6 million of committed project funds to complete the Bassett Creek storm sewer utility relocation related to the Blue Line Extension Light Rail project. And this portion of the Bassett Creek Tunnel is under Highway 55. So a little history for this project is that MnDOT contributed $3.25 million to the project for both the construction of a new Bassett Creek Tunnel under Highway 55 and the removal of the existing 130-plus-year-old tunnel from underneath Highway 55. And in 2018, the project office constructed the new section of tunnel underneath Highway 55 with the anticipation of completing the removal of the project with the Blue Line Extension construction. And since that construction was delayed, we considered doing this project earlier this spring as a standalone project, but there was concerns of impacts to the neighborhood with the existing Glenwood closure due to Southwest construction. So we were asked to hold off on removing that section of tunnel. So with the undetermined project construction timeline for Blue Line and potential BLRT alignment adjustments due to BNSF negotiations, MnDOT has decided they would complete the removal of this project after Glenwood project has reopened. The commitment from the project is to pay MnDOT $1.6 million to complete the removal of that tunnel, and the anticipated date would be after Glenwood opens back up And I believe that time frame is later 2021 or early 2022. Are there any questions?
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Any questions from council members? All right. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-256.
Chambliss makes a motion to approve.
Moved by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Cummings, second.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Becky, would you call the roll?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner, Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Nick. Next, we're on to business item 2020-267. It's a Metro Gold Line BRT subordinate funding agreement with MnDOT, and we have Chris Beckwith here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I am Chris Beckwith, the project director for the Gold Line, and I am presenting the third of the trio of MnDOT SFA subordinate funding agreement business items to you today. This is for the Gold Line, and this is for an amount of $1,550,017. The difference between the Gold Line SFA with MnDOT, which is our fifth SFA, it's for 2021 work like the other two, but ours actually is in the design phase. So the Gold Line is 60% complete with our design. So MnDOT is supporting us with a little bit different role. So they are helping with design support, environmental oversight, utility coordination, and right-of-way management activities. And we would also seek to move forward with keeping MnDOT on our team moving into construction as well. So you'll see us back annually for this. So the proposed action is that the Met Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the Metro Gold Line subordinate funding agreement number 5 with MnDOT for an amount not to exceed $1,550,017. And I will stand for any questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions from council members? All right. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-267.
Fredson, happy to make that motion.
Okay, moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
I think it's second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner, Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Chris. With that, we're done with our business for the evening. I think all 4 of those items can go on consent to the full council unless I hear objection. All right, we will do that. Next, we're on to information items. The first one is our microtransit pilot project. We have Merida Cloutta here.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Oh, I see it's already up on the screen, so thanks, Craig. Thanks for the opportunity to share this exciting pilot project with you this afternoon. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Meredith Klikatka. I'm the program manager for shared mobility at Metro Transit. I am within the strategic initiatives department. So next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit about the background for the microtransit pilot. In general, what shared mobility is. For a quick snapshot, shared mobility is just generally transportation services that are shared amongst users. So transit technically falls into that category, but it's more traditionally associated with things that are on a technology-enabled platform. So you see some photos there of Nice Ride, which is an e-bike share, and a scooter share. So those are some examples of shared mobility that have been deployed around the Twin Cities region. As this grew within the region, there was an identification of a need to coordinate these services with the transit system. And so I was brought on about 2 years ago to work on that coordination. And the project background that you see here, we developed over the past year or so a shared mobility strategy, which had about 20 or 30 ways that we can both integrate with those services and launch some of those services ourselves. And this was developed internally with staff input, people who are already working on these topics throughout the agency. And one of the key takeaways for that was really an interest in implementation of a microtransit pilot that I'm talking about today. So this is a little bit unique. We are actually going to partner with MTS at the Metropolitan Council on this project. So it is really a joint pilot here. As you can see, many of the strategies kind of fall into those two groups. How are we integrating with new mobility services like bikes or scooters or mobility as a service? And how are we expanding that service? So looking at how are we improving van pool or how are we piloting microtransit are some examples. Next slide, please. For those of you not familiar with microtransit, really microtransit is technology-enabled dial-a-ride. So you can think about it from a user experience, it's going to operate more like a TNC, like an Uber or Lyft, where you kind of call the vehicle on your phone and it either picks you up right where you are, or in the microtransit case, you may walk a block or two to have the vehicle pick you up, and then eventually it routes you to your destination. For those of you that have ever taken Uber Pool or Lyft line in other cities where there is a lot higher density, these trips are shared with other passengers. And so that's really at the heart of microtransit. It is important to note here that this is really a service that is on demand. So as opposed to traditional dial-a-ride that is usually scheduled trips, this is really something that you queue or request within like 10-minute time frame when you're looking to travel. So from the operator experience, there is actually a device on the vehicle that lets them know how to turn to pick up new users who are requesting these rides throughout the system. Typically, the technology that does the routing is privately managed. I can't think of many examples where agencies have developed their own technology. It is typically sourced out, but there are loads of national and local examples actually of microtransit service. So there's probably, I would say easily over about 100 transit agencies across the country who are operating a microtransit style service. And here locally, you may be familiar with some of them. That includes Southwest Prime, that's run by Southwest Transit, and MVTA has recently launched this style of service. There is a lot of ways that you can launch microtransit, and really it depends on your goals. So people launch these services in an urban context, in a suburban context, or exurban. It can serve different types of trips, whether that is more of a TNC style, so trips that go from your exact location to your exact destination, or those which we call point-to-point trips, or those that are focused more on first last mile. So services that are around a particular transit station or a BRT station that either pick you up or drop you off at those high frequency services. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm sure some of you are asking why now and what are the goals for the project? We've spent a lot of time thinking through this. A number of years ago, we were looking at microtransit project, and one of the keys that we learned from kind of evaluating that, moving towards a pilot, was that we really need a good consensus internally on what the goals for the project are. One of the differences for this region is it is so large and it serves lots of different types and land use types that we really felt like we wanted to separate that out within the goals. So these are the three kind of top three goals that we landed on in terms of the piloting for microtransit. So expanding mobility choices, and I should say the suburban context and urban context are not going to be both included in this pilot. We're really focusing on those two bolded at the top. So expanding mobility choices, especially for low income areas and BIPOC communities. And number two, expanding access to high frequency fixed route and transit ways. So really thinking about how are we leveraging the services that we're already providing through a community to build on those existing assets. So some of the reasons that we're looking to do a pilot right now, one is that the industry is evolving and really maturing. So as I said, there are loads of agencies who have done microtransit, who've been running it for a number of years. There are lots of key lessons learned and lots of publications coming out around kind of best practice around engagement and marketing. Also, the FTA has more formalized microtransit in their kind of service repertoire. So they did a program called Mobility on Demand, which was a sandbox project. They're on the second or third iteration of that, and they really took microtransit and said, let's test a lot of things with different agencies across the country, both from a technology or a service delivery or user experience, and said, what lessons can we learn from that? And so we're finding lots of information and good data coming out of those. The second is, and I'll talk about this a lot later, is really project partners. So Ford approached us with an opportunity to partner on a first last mile pilot that we felt was really well aligned with the goals that you see here. And so we are going to be pursuing that. The next I'll cover is really just need for some innovation and innovative ideas in challenging times. I pulled some articles about how other agencies have been using their microtransit services during COVID, similar to the innovation that we've been using on our dial-a-ride service and Nick's team has been pursuing. So for example, LA, you see in that lower article, was able to flex their service in the microtransit zones to cover particular areas that were harder hit than other communities. So the last one, I will get into this a little bit later, but this is also an opportunity for us to leverage our own investment in GTFS real-time. So GTFS real-time is launching, I think, in the past couple weeks. This pilot is specifically focused on how does the real-time availability of information for when a transit vehicle is arriving, how do we connect that to microtransit service? So from a user experience, how are we decreasing wait times from transferring from one vehicle to the other to reduce overall trip time that we know is really important to our customers? Next slide, please. Thank you. So a little on the project details. This is a one-year pilot. We are looking to launch in May of 2021 and run service through May of 2022. Our proposed site for the pilot is North Minneapolis. There are a number of reasons that we are looking at this area. One is its connection to the Metro C line and to the high frequency fixed route rail that was part of the project goals. And the second is its connection to our goals around expanded options. And as you'll see in the next slide, also the C line ridership has not declined in the way the rest of the system has seen. And so that was a really important element. For the service area, we are looking at roughly 2 square miles. So it's relatively small service area, and it's probably 2 to 3 stations. Many of those details are yet to be worked out, but we have 5 vehicles that we're going to be running, so servicing 2 to 3 stations. As you can see, there's lots of service details to work out. Both the service area, even from when we have been showing partners this map, we understand that we're not hitting some of the higher density housing in that middle section, so that we have to be sure to pick up those areas. Days of the week, which hours of the day the service is going to run, and then a big focus on what is the fare policy around this, since we haven't run a microtransit service before, and what our policy around transfers is. Next slide, please. So a little on the project background and the Ford opportunity. So this Ford project is actually a Department of Energy grant that Ford received both with the city of Seattle, and they were looking for a Midwest partner. Some of the reasons that this was a really good alignment with our priorities is that connection to the GTFS real-time data. So this really is a cutting-edge microtransit approach. This hasn't been done in the country to make a specific connection with the availability of where the vehicles are and to make for a better customer experience and lower wait times. But also there is technical support that Ford can bring to the table, which is supporting on survey and simulation and evaluation. Some of the other kind of elements of the project is the collaboration with Transloc software. So you can think of the software as it is actually the screen that is navigating the driver and telling them when there is a passenger to pick up along the route. That's Transloc, so they will be doing training on drivers and providing the software piece of that. And the last one really is that direct funding. So as part of the project, DOE provided direct funding to the pilot cities that cuts the year-long pilot by cost to about a third, which really enabled us to run the service for a full year and really get some good information and data and user experience out of it. And so the graph that you see there, this change in ridership, that was, as I explained previously, you'll see the about roughly 40% ridership loss on the C line over the course of COVID, as opposed to really close to 70% on the rest of the system. So that we know that this is providing a value add for people who are taking this service every day. And with that, next slide, please. So next steps, the implementation task force kickoff, we actually had that earlier today. So that was the first really internal meeting where we met with all of the departments and talked through the project. This is going to require a lot of coordination both across MTS and Metro Transit. Our next phase is really engaging with stakeholders. So obviously partnership with the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County is going to be critical. So we will begin engaging with them probably this week. Next, we'll be looking at planning for public engagement and branding, the marketing and communications. I don't want to underemphasize these elements because from the literature coming out in the industry, that engagement and branding and marketing is really a critical piece of microtransit success. Next, as you can imagine, some of the items that will come across your all's desk or computer screens will be the contracting and procurement side of the project. So similar to how we would do planning at the Metro Transit side, and if we were contracting out operations through MTS, this is going to be a similar setup. So you might see one or two contracts come across the Transportation Committee for approval in the next couple months. And other than that, the service planning, of course, operations coordination, and then the fare policy and technology, which is going to be a big piece of the project. And so with that, Madam Chair, I think that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Meredith. Are there questions from council members? Kind of quiet. I have a couple, and we'll see. Oh, I see. Councilmember Cummings.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. It was more of a comment. This is really, really exciting to me to hear about. I think that we know that we need to be doing things differently. And a pilot program like this offers so many things and so many ways that we can look at what we're doing, what we need to be doing differently, and we might be able to do. So I think the creativity of the staff and the thinking and pulling all these pieces together, I realize there's lots to be worked out yet, but I think it's a really, really exciting innovative way to look at what we're doing and how we might be able to do it better. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks, I agree. I'm really excited about this and glad that we're looking at some of these alternate modes of transportation and how we can connect them. My thoughts went to where we can close some of the gaps in terms of access to transportation. I see that we are using a used route for the pilot, and I'm assuming that's to get the best data from it. But I'd like to know more about like what they did in Ontario, looking at the little used bus routes. I know that a lot of times when we look at our criteria for transportation investment, we're actually looking at areas where there's high volume versus low volume. So if you could speak to, the potential for looking at some of the lower volume areas, some of the suburban areas, that'd be great.
Sure, and thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. I will do the best I can to answer that. As I mentioned, microtransit really can serve a coverage model too. So that's more of the suburban context or the lower frequency routes that you mentioned. And actually, that is where a lot of the piloting for that has happened across the country. So you were absolutely right, in Ontario as well. So a lot of agencies do look at that as a coverage model, which is one of the reasons that we're actually partnering with MTS, because there are a lot of lessons learned to be learned both on the Metro Transit side, but also in the MTS side.
Okay, and then you chose North Minneapolis because of the high ridership, or can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Yes, thank you for that question. So when Minneapolis was identified as or North Minneapolis specifically was identified as a potential site, we really were looking at, yes, the existing ridership, especially in a COVID context. So that was really important that we didn't see the drop there, but also the connection that we really wanted to provide another level of service there. Minneapolis had approached us about a year ago and really had been seeking proposals from other transportation companies to run a similar on-demand circulator style service in that area, because the engagement that they were doing through the Transportation Action Plan, they really identified that there was that need in the community, both from a time of day gap, but also a coverage gap. So we felt like this would be a good fit with those identified transportation needs and something that Metro Transit could run.
All right, additional questions or comments? Okay, I have a couple of quick ones. So, Meredith, how would you, like if somebody was to ask us, what is the difference between microtransit and transit link? Because especially in the outer areas, we have transit link service in some places.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The difference is that it is on demand. So as opposed to transit link, which really relies on scheduled rides and maybe 24 hours in advance reservation. I don't exactly know the rules around that, so I might be misstating them. This is really technology enabled. So you would request a trip from this vehicle as soon as you want the trip, really within 10 minutes of when you were looking to depart.
Perfect. I'm very excited about it. The next one I had, so you mentioned the public engagement, branding, marketing, that side of it. One example we have in our region of microtransit is Southwest Prime. You mentioned this, Southwest Transit has a service, and I think, having sort of that outreach and branding that they did around that has been sort of key to their success. How do you approach something like that when it's something that, lives within our broader marketing and branding?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is a tough question. One of the ways that we're looking to engage with the community is really around education of what the service is. So since we haven't done this style trip in the urban core, there's going to be a big hurdle in getting people familiar with the service and how it operates. So there'll be lots of education related to that. We will also be doing some specific engagement with groups leading up to the launch. And then 3 months in, we're going to go to the users of the service and help. This is pretty standard practice for microtransit service, is to have the users evaluate the service 3 months in and make adjustments like service area or time of day. One of the nice things about microtransit is that you can flex the boundaries of the service area just digitally. And so it makes it much easier to execute those small changes. So that's some of the ways.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm really excited to see it coming together. And also, just to highlight that I think it's really great that we have a project working with MTS and Metro Transit together. I think it's a great way to utilize internal resources and expertise. So I'm very excited to see that. So thank you very much. Look forward to hearing more as we move through this. So thank you, Meredith.
Great. Thanks, Madam Chair.
All right, we're on to our last information item. It's the capital budget presentation. We have Ed Petrie and Heather Augustin-Hebner here to take us through this.
Good afternoon, Chair. Ed Petrie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, that sounds good. Okay, once again, Ed Petrie, Metro Transit, and Heather?
Heather Augustin-Hebner from MTS.
We're here to present the 2021 through 2026 Transit Capital Program, which will be the capital budget and the CIP. We have a number of slides that we'll go through this evening, a lot of numbers that we'll go through, and so please bear with that, and let's begin the presentation. Next slide. First of all, our overall capital program timeline. This is the program that we are on. Heather and I this evening are presenting to the Transportation Committee. We will then join all the other divisions on Wednesday night at the council and do the full council CIP presentation. Then on October 28th, you'll be asked to approve the public comment draft, which will include both the proposed operating budget and the proposed 2021 through 2026 CIP. That will then go up for public comment and review. And then when we come back then to the council then on December 9th, we will discuss with you any proposed changes we have both on the operating side and also on the capital side before we bring our recommendation forward for adoption by the council. Next slide. Overall, with our overall capital program, first of all, the one thing that we talked about last year, and we'll talk about again this year, it's, our overall capital program, it's a very extensive process for the council and for the transportation division. As you can imagine, we have many different projects, many different funding sources, and it's not just a singular in view, it's multi-years in view. Many of the capital projects require a long-range view. You have to go through the beginning process of the engineering, the design, like on, for example, the Minneapolis bus garage. You first of all find the site, you go through engineering, you go through design, then you hire the contractor for the construction. So many projects can go 2, 3, 4 years. Bus procurements, as you are aware, when we order a bus, buses could take anywhere from 9 to 18 months to deliver. For example, a rail car could take a couple of years to deliver from the time we order it. So projects, it's a very long range view with all of our projects. One of the things that's always very consistent, as Heather and I talk about every quarter when we bring forward a capital budget amendment, is the council adopts the CIP, which is a capital improvement program. Once funding becomes available, whether it's federal or a local source, we then bring the project forward into the authorized capital budget. And we do not move it forward into the authorized capital budget until the funding is available. And one of the things we've discussed before, there's multiple revenue sources from the federal side, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but also from the local side, which could be regional transit capital, it could be a county match, it could be a state match. So we have many different revenue sources. Just to give you kind of a feel for the size of the overall transportation division, very large division. We have nearly 1,100 regular route and contract buses. There's over 600 Metro Mobility buses, 1,100 shelters. We have 16 support facilities, which includes our garages, our overhaul base, police, our administrative buildings, 41 rail platforms, and 65 parking structures and surface lots. So as you can see with our program, when we start talking about the dollars, we have a very large program. It is very intense. Next slide. So the CIP parameters, as we discussed last year, we'll discuss again this evening. We have a very fiscally constrained capital budget. We have the overall price for the budget. First of all, I want to make a point that with our budget, first of all, it is a rolling CIP. So we had the budget last year. We will bring another year on this year where we were adjusting some of the projects, adjusting scopes. Some projects have decided not to move forward, and our new projects are coming forward. So that is all going to be discussed this evening. We've set our limits for each of the funding sources based upon historical collections and forecasts. But one of the points that I also want to make as a fact is that our funding sources and the funding sources that Heather and I are using this evening, the funding sources and the inflation parameters with them have been reviewed with our financial management plans. And those are the plans that we submitted to the FTA, for example, with the Southwest plan. So the parameters that we used and received the FTA concurrence are the plans that we are using in our program this evening. Overall, we're going to be looking at the numbers two different ways. One with the blue and the green line extensions, one without. And so with the blue and the green line extensions, our program is just over $3.9 billion. If you back out the blue and the green line extension, which are a large portion of the Transitway budget, it brings us down to $1.5 million, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, which a big piece of that is preservation. Within our CIP, our capital program, our focus is safety, asset preservation, and long-term capital maintenance, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. It includes both Metro Transit, Metropolitan Transportation Services, and the suburban transit providers, which Heather will talk about. One of the things that we've also done with the capital program this year is we've reviewed all of our bus purchases and all of our bus assumptions based upon the COVID impacts. Because as you are aware, for example, Metro Transit, we're looking at an 80% service level for bus operations next year. Well, that does have some impact on our bus buys and the need to purchase buses. So that's one of the things that we have done a very extensive review of looking at our bus purchases, looking at the needs for the replacements, and trying to fit the purchases along with our COVID forecast, I would say, with how we think COVID is going to impact operations. And this is one thing that we will continue to review throughout the rest of 2020 and into 2021 as I talk about this COVID journey that we are on. As we hopefully start to come out of this COVID journey, we'll have to review then our bus purchase assumptions and make adjustments. And if we need any adjustments, we will come back to the council and we'll talk to you about it at that time. Next slide. So overall, the capital program, I kind of referenced this early. Within our plan, our regional transit capital, now this is the bonding authority that we get from the legislature on an annualized basis. Regional transit capital is that legislative authority. It's backed by real estate taxes, but this is generally our local match for federal dollars. Generally, when we do a federal grant, for example, like to purchase buses, our general grant is at an 80-20 split, 80% federal, 20% local match. So we use the regional transit capital to match our federal dollars. The federal dollars that we have in our program this evening are recommended is they match the MAP 21 regulations. They're increasing about 2.2% from 21 through 26. That's also matching our financial management plans we did for the New Starts programs. It will include the 5307 formula dollars that we get. Now, these are formula dollars that we get on an annualized basis. We file, both Heather's group and my group, we file a cost report called the NTD cost report with the National Transit Database division of the FTA, revealing all of our information on number of passengers, hours, miles of service, costs of service. That information is then used nationwide to then disperse funds out to old transit agencies based upon those factors. We also get money in from 5337 State of Good Repair. We get State of Good Repair money. So the formula dollars 5307 money generally starts 2 years after a service goes into service. State of Good Repair starts generally around 7 years after they go into service. We get the State of Good Repair money for both bus and for light rail. And then we get 5339 bus and bus facilities money. The state bonds that we've assumed in the presentation this evening are assumed in our CIP program are based upon current law state funds. So any money that has been currently appropriated to the council, we're recommending for bringing into the CIP program. But for example, any additional state bonds, for example, or state assumptions for like the BRT lines, If the legislature hasn't appropriated it, we're not recognizing it into the CIP. Once it does get recognized or appropriated, at that point, we will bring a budget amendment in and bring those funds in. As you would assume, we're including the New Starts federal funding. For example, we have the federal funding in here for the Southwest extension. Next slide. So overall, our priorities, like I've briefly touched on already, is we want to maintain, we're looking at, first of all, maintaining our system in a state of good repair, and we're replacing all of our vehicles per fleet management plans. We have both fleet management plans for Metro Transit and MTS, Metropolitan Transportation Services, for all the large bus, contracted buses, and Metro Mobility buses. We also have fleet plans for all of our rail fleet. One of the priorities is maintaining all of our facilities in a state of good repair. We have transit improvements, and we'll be talking about Metro Mobility ridership demand and that impact on the capital program. When Heather gets to her portion on MTS, she will address some of the challenges they have with Metro Mobility. On the building of the transitway side or the expanding of the system, some of our items we have in the plan this evening, once again, would be the Southwest. The Botno, we had the Botno plan in with the same dollar amount as last year. It's just that the years have slightly adjusted, but it's still within the plan parameters. Our bus rapid transit program that we have discussed previously, that's in the program, along with, we do have a few expansion vehicles that were CMAQ from congestion mitigation air quality awarded through TAB. We're recognizing those. We have some beginning components of the bus electrification program. As you recall, we do currently have 8 buses that we're running on the C line. We do have some minor dollars in here for some bus electric infrastructure, some more charging stations, those types of items. One of the things I do want to point out that this program this evening that we're bringing forward does not include the impacts of Excel. As you are aware, we are talking to Excel about an expanded program with them, about potentially getting some dollars that would really kickstart our bus electrification program with both buses and electric infrastructure. Since those funds have not been approved yet, we're not recognizing them this evening in the program, but over the next few months, if we are lucky enough to get the funding from Excel for the electric program, we would then bring it forward via budget amendment. We would bring those funds in along with the electric buses and the electric bus infrastructure. We do have the final pieces of our new Minneapolis bus garage included in this program, and support and customer facilities and some technology. Next slide. Equity priorities. One of the things that we want to talk about this evening is we do have a number of equity priorities that we are continually analyzing and continuing to analyze moving forward. First of all, we want to make sure that we're meeting all the ADA growth and demand with Metro Mobility, which Heather will talk about. All of our buses that we replace, they're replaced based upon regional bus standards across the region. So they're consistent across the region. We have a very good program that we're working on right now with the better bus stops and improvements to better bus stops. And so we have that included in our program this evening. We're also looking at, we also have some dollars set aside for, we're calling it customer experience improvements. One of the things that Wes and Leslie are working with folks at Metro Transit is looking at improvements to equity, different items that we can do to improve the equity experience for our customer. So we do have a set aside of some dollars within our capital budget that as these programs are more solidified and identified, we will then bring those dollars into those programs. So we do have that set aside built into this program. We have our ADA, our bus stop program we've talked about before, improvements to public facilities and capital improvements to them, and to our bus stops, which would include lighting, heating, and shelter, and those types of items. One of the other thing too is we do have some capital development, as we talked about, for our ABRTs. Our ABRT lines, one is once again going through areas that will have some major equity improvements for us. So that's one of the things, we do have the dollars in here for some service expansion with the ABRTs. Next slide. Asset management plan that I've already talked about, our asset management plan. Originally, we filed our plan with the FTA in 2018. We have to review the plan on an annualized basis and give updates to the FTA. So just want to stress that once again, this is a plan per the FTA, per MAP 21 requirements, and our CIP is following the MAP 21 requirements along with annual updates to the FTA. Next slide. Now we get to the fun part of, well, I think anyway, the fun part of the presentation. We're going to start talking numbers here. So first of all, the capital program, as we talked about, it's a $3.9 billion program. And as you can see from this slide, as you would assume, it's mainly predominated by 74% of it is the transit ways, which the biggest piece of that would be the blue line and the green line extensions. The next piece is fleet, which is all of the fleet, the replacement of our fleet, both large buses, metro mobility buses, contracted services buses, about $792 million, or 20% of the budget. We have some costs in for both public and support facilities, and some of the other costs, which would include technology, fare collection equipment updates to our fare collection equipment, and fare collection system upgrades. Overall, within the plan, our 2021 through 2026, our overall spending, future spending includes, there's $489 million worth of projects that are currently authorized in the capital budget that have dollars remaining that will spend out in 2021 and thereafter, and then the additional spending of this $3.9 million for the new CIP. Next slide. Okay, now this slide goes over how we're going to pay for everything. We're assuming about 66% of the revenue will come from federal sources. A large portion of that would be 5307 money, but also all the New Start programs. We also have the counties in here at 24%, which would be local county support, which would mainly be on the New Start programs. We have regional transit capital, as I talked about, from our bonding authority, $332 million at 8%. We do have the CMAQ funds in there from $102 million, or 2% of our budget. Now, this is money, once again, that was awarded through the TAB process for some of the BRT lines for buses and some construction. And then we have a small amount of state money in there of about $4.8 million. But it's mainly predominated with the federal sources, which would be, a lot of it would be formula dollars and the New Starts funds. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to use the money or by objective. On the left-hand side, the uses by the funds, as you can see, once again, $2.9 million of transit ways, but we're going to spend it, as we talked about before, on fleet, customer facilities, support facilities, technology, and the other capital needs. But on the other side, you can see on the uses by objective, it's transit ways, preservation, expansion, small amount of expansion, and then transit way preservation. Next slide. Okay, so if we back out the Metro Green Line and the Metro Blue Line extensions, now you get a flavor for how we look just as our base operating system that's currently operating today. It's about a $1.5 billion program from 2021 through 2026. Somewhat, the revenues are a little consistent with what you saw before. About 59% of our revenue, or just over $900 million, will come from the federal government. Now, these funds would come from mainly 5307 formula dollars, 5337 state of good repair, and 5339 bus and bus facilities. We do have some our regional transit capital, which we will use for the local match. We do have some local county money of just over $200 million, and then our CMAQ money, as we had discussed. Next slide. So let's do the same breakdown here between the uses and by categories and by objective. As you can see, 51% of our budget is for fleet. We have a major fleet expansion program for the buses. For example, on Metro Transit, generally our buses will have a 12 to 14-year life. So generally, they will be replaced once during the CIP cycle. But for example, when you get to Metro Mobility, their contracted services would be the large buses replaced potentially once during the cycle. But when you get to Metro Mobility, they're a 5-year bus. So those buses, some of them could be replaced twice during this cycle. We do have some transitway costs of $523 million, which is for our current transitways. We have technology, and then the other items for support, customer facilities, and some other capital, which is mainly the other capital. A lot of that is for fare collection needs and technology. By objective, though, the largest portion of our budget without the blue and the green line is for preservation, maintaining our assets in a state of good repair. And then we also have our transitway preservation. We do have some transitway dollars in there, and which would be mainly for the BRT lines. And then we have a slight amount of expansion of $79 million. Next slide. Okay, Heather.
Okay, so I'm just going to continue what Ed has already started, and what we're going to do for you from here on is we're just going to drill down for more details of the capital program. So we're going to start off with MTS, and just as a brief reminder, that includes contracted fixed route, Metro Mobility, the Suburban Transit Provider Capital Program, and Transit Link. Next slide, please. Okay, so our 6-year CIP is nearly $375 million, and over 80% of our CIP supports the preservation of our existing system. We fund our preservation needs, like Ed said earlier, at the higher level through a combination of federal dollars and regional transit capital bonds. Fleet preservation accounts for nearly 3/4 of the MTS budget, and it includes replacement of large and small buses for suburban transit providers, MTS fixed route, Transit Link, and Metro Mobility. Just if you want to look over on the right-hand side, so I talked a little bit about what the fleet represents, but our technology, the yellow square or the yellow triangle, it's really primarily technology needed to make our system run. And in the case of MTS, it's primarily on-bus technology. Examples of that would be fare collection equipment, cameras, computers, radios, that sort of thing. The facility section of MTS is really pretty small. It's only about $3.5 million. And that's a project to modernize the MVTA Burnsville bus garage. So Ed talked earlier about asset preservation. One of the exercises the transportation division did is we assessed all of the facilities in the entire region. And of the bus facilities, the MVTA Burnsville bus garage ranked the lowest. MVTA went out and got a successful grant from the federal government and the council. We are providing the $700,000 local match. So that's just one way of how we use asset management to prioritize funding. The other category of just shy of $23 million consists of suburban transit provider projects that they self-identify, and some projects that we run regionally, including engine and transmission replacement and midlife bus rehabs. And that's really another tool that we use to keep our fleet in a state of good repair. So if it's halfway through a bus replacement cycle and we need new seats and some other things to make it safer, comfortable, cleaner, we'll go ahead and take care of that. Next slide, please. So between 2021 and 26, we have about $65 million in expansion plan. So similar to our preservation budget, expansion is primarily funded with RTC and federal funds. This chart does specifically call out CMAQ federal funding. One of the roles that we play with the suburban transit provider expansion projects is we help provide the local match through the regional solicitation process. So how that generally works is the region provides a 20% capital match as funding isn't available. So what we do in our capital program is we fully fund one CMAQ project every year. And that would include the federal money and then the local match. So that's one of the pieces of expansion that you'll see here. And then as specific projects are awarded through the regional solicitation, you'll start to see those individual project names in our capital program. The other half of the expansion piece is Metro Mobility expansion. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So why don't we transition there, please? So Metro Mobility continues to be the story, not only on the operating side of the budget, but on the capital side of our budget. The MTS fleet, and that includes our contracted routes, Metro Mobility routes, and suburban transit provider buses. You can see just that the picture tells what's going on. Our expansion is driven by two things. One is CMAQ expansion projects from suburban transit providers, but the vast majority of our expansion is Metro Mobility growth. Metro Mobility fleet is a service. The service and the fleet is not like a contracted bus or a Metro Transit bus. You know, if you're running a regular route, you can have up to 40 or 50 people on that bus. With Metro Mobility, it's just a very different service model, and there's fewer passengers that you can put on a bus and still meet federal service requirements. So as Metro Mobility ridership increases, so does the fleet. METMO has grown 120% from 2004 to 2020. That's 290 to 634 buses. Our capital program, our CIP, we have 271 expansion buses programmed. By 2026, we project the Metmo fleet will be to nearly 900 buses, and that represents a 210% growth since 2004. So we're continuing to figure out how to manage metro mobility growth because at this rate, it is going to chew up all of our federal funding, and we can see out in the future there will be a year where we're not going to be able to fund all of the fleet replacement. We know that's out there. It's not anywhere in the imminent future, but it is something that we're keeping a really, really close eye on. And the other thing, like Ed mentioned, we're continuing to take a look at what COVID is doing to our ridership. Metro mobility ridership is bouncing back faster than regular route, but we're still taking that into consideration as we're placing bus purchases. Next slide, please. So conservatively, over $120 million of our CIP is dedicated for suburban transit provider projects. This includes replacement buses, and it includes the CMAQ expansion buses. So how this works is the funding is not going to be the same amount every year for every provider, but there's going to be some heavy ebbs and flows in there depending on bus replacement cycles. So let's talk about MBTA. In 1 year, we may have a really high dollar amount dedicated to MBTA if they have a bunch of like a 40-foot bus replacements, because those are really expensive buses. And then you might see it go down for a couple of years and then up for a couple of years. The important thing to just remember is that in our CIP, we replace 100% of the suburban transit provider buses. This category in this $120 million bucket also includes regional technology like farebox replacement. Suburban transit providers also earn dollars through federal reporting. Ed talked earlier in the presentation about NTD reporting. Suburban providers essentially earn those same dollars too. So we have a formula, we allocate those to each individual provider, and then they self-identify the projects. The council has historically defederalized those projects for the suburban transit providers. So we basically give them RTC generally in lieu of the federal dollars. That makes it easier for the suburban transit providers. It makes it easier for us, and it seems to be an approach that everybody appreciates. There's a couple CMAQ specific awarded projects that are in our CIP. We are providing the council match to that. A couple of those include the Southwest Mobility Hub, the MBTA Orange Line Connector, and then that MBTA Burnsville Bus Garage that I mentioned earlier. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ed to talk about Metro Transit. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, just like Heather stated, for Metro Transit, I will do a deeper dive down, a deeper drill down into the Metro Transit side of the CIP. The CIP, once again, would include Metro Transit Bus, our Metro Blue Line and the Green Line, North Star Commuter Rail, as we talked about, both the Blue and the Green Line extensions and the Orange Line. And then it's an additional ABRTs. Next slide. So as Heather did, first of all, I will talk about the maintenance of the system, then I'll go into expansion. Overall, the maintenance of our system for the 6-year CIP 21 through 26 is just over $659 million. You can see on the federal side, it's basically 75% of it would be covered by federal sources, and 25% of it would be the RTC from regional bonding as the local match. During this 6-year CIP, we would plan to replace 577 of our large buses at Metro Transit, which would include 427 standard buses, 116 RTICs, and 34 coaches. As we had talked about earlier, and as also Heather talked about too, the same with ours, we've reviewed all of our bus purchases along with the COVID impacts on our service and have adjusted our bus needs based upon what we think we're going to need currently for COVID, and then as we start coming out of the COVID impacts. As we talked about though, our base budget does not include the electric bus program. We currently have 8 buses that we're using on the C line, but we have no additional dollars in here for additional buses and we just have a minimal amount for some additional electric charging infrastructure, but no additional buses. But as you're aware that we are working again with Excel on the electric bus program, which would cover both cost for buses and the infrastructure charging stations. And if it happens to be approved, we would bring that in hopefully in early 2021 into the CIP and into the capital budget. We also have dollars set aside for support facilities and repair. First of all, the fleet down below, as we just talked about, that is about 75% of our budget. The biggest driver of our budget, just like salaries and bennies are the biggest driver of our budget on operating, fleet is the biggest driver of our budget on the capital side. Then on the other items, for example, support facilities and repair, that includes items like roofs, plumbing, electric, HVAC systems, anything for support facilities, for repairing them and keeping them in a state of good repair. Energy enhancements, we also have some dollars set aside for energy enhancements. That's mainly energy enhancements at our support facilities. What we have found historically is that any of these types of investments that we put into our facilities for energy enhancements, most of them will have anywhere from a 4 to a 5 year ROI. Very good investments for us, saves us many, many dollars on future utilities. We do have dollars set aside for ADA pads and signage improvements. Our technology upgrades will include our new fare box system. With our fare boxes on our buses are called GFI fare boxes. And we have basically a 10-year plan that we're actually working with on the GFI fare boxes that over the next 10 years, we'll slowly be integrating the new fare box technology and taking the old technology out. The positive is the old GFI fare boxes do integrate and work with the new GFI fare boxes, but we basically have a 10-year plan where we can slowly integrate those repairs in. We also do have in our CIP a plan for a new cubic upgrade and some new cubic equipment and the fare collection system upgrade with cubic. And then the other thing we also do have included in here is, like I said, fare collection equipment, but we also have our non-revenue vehicle fleet, which would be all the support vehicles, either whether they're police vehicles or vehicles, for example, that are used by all of our street supervisors, for example. So that's also included into our maintenance of our current system, $659 million. Next slide. For Metro Transit, we have just a modest amount in for expansion, about $14.5 million. You can see that's 59% of it comes from federal sources, 41% comes from regional transit capital. The biggest piece of this would be the completion of the new Minneapolis bus garage that's being built. So that will complete its spend out during this CIP period. As I talked about, we do have a few $1 million in here for some more electric bus infrastructure and some more charging stations. We have some dollars for bus and rail support infrastructure and some additional improvements to our customer facilities. So it's about $14.5 million. Next slide. As we talked about earlier, the biggest piece of our CIP, again, would be the Transitway division, where the transitways within our CIP. It's about $2.9 billion. You can see it's predominated. It's $994 million. One thing I do want to point out that you're going to say, well, $994 million, I thought the Green Line extension was $2.003 billion. Well, it is, but the $994 million is a portion that will fall within the CIP period. There's outliers, the earlier dollars that have already been spent or that will be spent afterwards. This is the portion that is within the current CIP. Blue Line's in at $1.4 million. We have Gold Line of $414 million. And then other projects like the DBE of $18 million. We have dollars in for Rush Line and for the LRT, North Star, State of Good Repair. A couple points I do want to point out. First of all, the dollars that we have in the Transitway budget reflect current state law, state bonding. So, for example, if they happen to have a special session at the legislature, and if we're fortunate enough to get additional bonding for transitways, that is not included in here, but would be brought forward in a future capital budget amendment. So this only reflects current state law. The other thing I do want to point out is that for the LRT and the North Star State of Good Repair, as we had talked about last year, we have enough dollars within our CIP to cover the first 3 years to maintain our LRT systems in a state of good repair, which would include all the different tracks and all those trackage and all those different items on that need repairs on the light rail system. The last 3 years of the system or of the repairs, we do not have enough funding for. So as we talked about last year, we're going to have to obtain additional funding for those other items, whether it be from a federal source, local source, or from the state. So that is one of the things that we are continuing to work with Wes and work with looking at identifying additional items that we can identify to fund these additional state of good repair for the light rail system. Next slide. So our long-term issues that we talked about, first of all, the added rail maintenance, as I talked about, consistent with last year, we have enough for the first 3 years. We have challenges in the next 3 years, the last 3 years of the CIP. We do have unfunded BRT transitways for future regional transit growth. We're reflecting tonight in the CIP what current law is, what we currently have funding commitments for from the counties, feds, and or the state. MAP 21, as we talked about, does require us to maintain our assets in a state of good repair, which we are trying to maintain and match the MAP 21 guidelines and report to the FTA on an annualized basis. And Heather has addressed the mobility growth on Metro Mobility. Next slide. So it brings us back to the capital timeline. Heather and I will be back on Wednesday night to the council along with ES, Parks, etc., and do the 2021 through 26 presentation to the council. Then it'll be brought back to the council on October 28th as part of the public comment draft, along with the operating budget. If it's approved by the council, it then goes out for its public comment period and review. We will then come back to the council then on December 9th, bring forward any changes that we will have. For example, like on the operating side, we will get a new state of Minnesota forecast for motor vehicle sales tax in November. When we adopt the budget in December, we will reflect the new state of Minnesota MVES forecast. We will also then reflect any changes that we might have. For example, if we'd happen to have Excel money between now and the end of the year before adoption, we would bring that in with the public hearing or with the final adoption in December. But we would make sure that any changes, both operating and capital, between the public hearing draft and their final recommendation, we will discuss that in detail with the council before adoption. So with that, Chair Committee members, Heather and I have concluded our presentation and would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Heather and Ed. All right, any questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the continued updates, Mr. Petrie and Augustine Hugh. So I'm kind of curious. We've known about this Metro Mobility growth for some time. I'm just curious, do we have like AARP advocates to talk to the legislature about what kind of support they need? Is that happening? Or other organizations similar to that for senior support? Knowing that many of the seniors use Metro Mobility and also the disabled.
Chair, council members, I think I may bring Nick Thompson in for a hand on this one. He's a little closer to some of the Metro Mobility operations than I am, although I do know there's a very heavy advocacy community connected with Metro Mobility, but I'll let Nick talk to that a little bit more.
Madam Chair, council member, that's a great question. It's an issue we've been talking about at the legislature. Well, first of all, can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yep.
It's an issue we've been talking about at the legislature for several years. And the legislature made the first step, I think, on the operating budget tonight. We're talking about capital. They made the first step on the operating budget last year by separating out Metro Mobility budget to a separate line item. I think that was a recognition that Metro Mobility is unique and important for the region and can't be put in competition to other services. We've mentioned the capital issue and we will continue. I think it's a longer term issue. So there's nothing urgent at the legislature that was brought to them. But we do definitely have our advocates. I think AARP and many different advocates have been advocating for the importance of this service. And it is truly one of those, I would say, bipartisan services at the legislature too, that gets a receptive ear no matter what party you're from. And so, nothing we've asked, we haven't specifically asked for anything on the capital side, but it's an issue we've brought up because we knew it's one that's coming in the future.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it's having its own separate line item from the operating side, and if we can just kind of continue down that road. knowing that, you know, the growth is going to continue. That's great. So much appreciated.
Thank you. Can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry. Additional questions? All right. Oh no, now something else is happening. All right. Good. I'm glad you can. So I tried to unmute and now Microsoft Project's opening. So, but anyhow, so any other questions from council members? All right. Thank you, Ed and Heather.
We'll see you Wednesday.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So if there is no other anything from any other council members, then we can be adjourned. Thank you all.